There is a generation out there that raised themselves. No, seriously, at 8 years old, they had a key around their neck, an empty house, and a list of rules on the fridge. Mom was at work, dad was at work, and nobody was coming home until 6. They didn't call anyone, they didn't text, they just handled it. And those kids, they're your 40-something coworkers who never panic during the crisis, the ones who fix things without asking for help, the ones who will absolutely not be posting about their feelings on LinkedIn. That's Generation X, and psychologically, they might be the most quietly fascinating generation alive. If you're into deep dives like this, subscribe and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Gen X is roughly anyone born between 1965 and 1980, sandwiched between the massive cultural conversation around boomers and the constant scrutiny on millennials and Gen Z. They just exist, quietly, competently, without making a fuss. And that's not an accident. The psychology of Gen X was shaped by a very specific set of conditions, conditions that basically no other generation experienced in the same way. And once you understand what those conditions were, so much about how they think, work, and relate to people suddenly makes total sense. Here's the thing nobody really talks about. By 1984, research from the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry estimated that around 7 million American kids between ages 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. 7 million. That's not a handful of kids. That's an entire generation learning at a deeply formative age that the world doesn't stop and wait for you to feel okay about something. You deal with it. You move on. Psychologists call environments like this high contingency settings. What that means is simple. Actions had direct, immediate consequences. No buffer, no cushion, no parent to run to. You broke something, you fixed it. You made a bad call, you lived with it. That kind of upbringing doesn't just build independence, it rewires how your brain processes risk. Gen X tends to think several steps ahead almost automatically, not because they're calculating, but because their brains were literally trained to anticipate consequences before they happened. But here's where it gets really interesting. While they were growing up self-sufficient at home, they were also watching the adult world completely fall apart around them. Watergate, corporate layoffs gutting families who played by every rule, divorce rates through the roof in the 70s and 80s, the fumbled response to the AIDS crisis, Iran-Contra. The message from institutions was always trust us, work hard, follow the rules. And then the rules just changed, without warning, repeatedly. So Gen X didn't become cynical exactly, they became what psychologists call defensive pessimists. They hope for good outcomes, but they mentally prepare for the floor to drop out, because it kept doing exactly that. And that mindset has an upside that people genuinely underestimate. Defensive pessimists are often exceptional in a crisis. They've already run the worst-case scenario in their head. When things go sideways, they're not spiraling. They're already 3 moves deep into the solution. This might explain something else you've noticed about Gen X. They are almost allergic to oversharing. It's not that they don't understand social media. Many of them helped build the internet. It's that they grew up in a world where privacy was just normal. When you did something embarrassing as a kid, maybe 5 people knew. It faded. Nobody screenshotted it. The instinct to broadcast your life, your wins, your struggles, your lunch, feels genuinely foreign and a little risky to them. Because Gen X learned early that the more visible you are, the more vulnerable you are. Less exposure, less damage. That's not paranoia. That's pattern recognition from decades of experience. And then there's how they work. Gen X isn't loyal to companies. They watched their parents give everything to employers who handed them pink slips when times got rough. That lesson landed hard. But they're fiercely, almost intensely loyal to their own competence. Because here's the logic. They can't control a layoff. They can control whether they're the most capable person in the room when one happens. That's why Gen X built multiple income streams before it was a trend. Not because they're naturally entrepreneurial, because nothing lasts, and they've known that since they were kids making their own after-school snacks. Here's the part I find genuinely fascinating. Gen X is simultaneously the most fiercely independent generation alive and quietly one of the most collaborative. They will never ask for help. They'll figure it out alone. But if you're in trouble, they'll show up. No announcement, no social post about what a great friend they are, just there doing the thing. That comes from necessity. When your parents weren't around, your friends became your lifeline. Those bonds formed without drama, and they lasted. They respect competence, not rank. If you've earned your expertise through real work, they'll back you completely. If you have a fancy title and nothing behind it, you'll lose them in about 30 seconds. So, next time you've got a Gen X coworker or family member who seems a little guarded, a little self contained, maybe a little too prepared for everything to go wrong, there's a whole childhood of empty houses and flickering TVs and figure it out yourself behind that. They're not cold, they're just built different. Now, I want to hear from you, especially if you're Gen X. Does this actually ring true, or is this all completely off base? Drop it in the comments. Genuinely curious what you think.